My name is George, and this is Citizens Gone Wild podcast. I was going to talk to you about the sins of the left, but something came up, and I decided I'm going to start with the sins of the right. Here's an article that's kind of interesting. Let me tell you about Boeing Corporation. They had a terrible, terrible year because of a problem with one of their planes, something about crashing a lot or something. Anyway, the head of the company is David Calhoun. Already suspicious. They laid off 30,000 workers. They lost $12 billion. And so what happened to this poor man, David Calhoun? He only earned $21.1 million. I have relatives who could destroy a company for the minimum wage. It's a big mistake to pay these people that much to destroy a company like
Oh, this is absolutely true. I mean, Oxford Corporation, which is now doing well, lost money twice, and both times they're back in the 90s, and both times their CEO got golden parachute of over $20 million.
It's like a miracle in reverse. Chris, we're expecting you.
Yeah, I mean, we want to put in bid, George, so we said we'll do the job for half the price.
You know, my relatives are cut rate, and they work through the weekend. Here's another situation. Norwegian Cruise Line barely survived. They lost $4 billion. They furloughed 20% of their staff. Frank Del Rio, who thinks, boy, who else has a cool name like this? Its chief executive earned $36.4 million. What I want to know is what happened to all the shrimp on those ships?
Wait. I want to know if it's floating switch spawns.
Yes, but here's the thing: there's no. This is not capitalism. I don't know what to call it, but it's not capitalism. In capitalism, if you lose, you lose. Here's another guy, Hilton. Well, I always stay there at their hotel. Chris, not you, Chris. Chris Nassetta, its chief executive, received compensation of about $56 million.
Chris only wishes he was he.
Hey,
yeah.
They laid off people around the world. They lost $720 million. We don't have capitalism in its correct form in this country.
No, well, correct form of capitalism hasn't really been working since maybe the 1960s or 70s.
That's absolutely right, and people don't realize it. And these right-wing yutzes who are ranting day and night, I rant along with you, but you've got to pick out the right target. And if you've got someone who said he's a capitalist, but he's stealing money, in effect, this is what I say that is, you have to call him out too. All right, that's enough of ranting against the right. Now we go back to our usual practice of ranting against the left. The New York Times has found diversity everywhere. And every story, no matter what, comes back to diversity. Here's an article on the front page of the Sunday New York Times. The class of 25, they'll graduate in 25, it's been very chaotic for them on college campuses. A lot of campuses actually ended up closed or just working through Zoom. There's chaos all over the place. It looks like a lot of universities won't even survive for long after this shutdown. And yet the thing that bothers them the most is 2020's turmoil alters diversity.
That's why.
I don't know, it altered diversity. Basically what it did was a lot of white people couldn't afford to go to school because their parents lost their job or whatever like that. And what happened was, in spite of that, the schools doubled down on diversifying the class, which means basically that they let people in and often gave them money. And these were people who probably couldn't have gotten in on merit alone. That's basically what the stories are about. All of these people who weren't really qualified because they're a different color, not white, or from another place, a poor place like, say, Africa or El Salvador, They got in the midst of all of this turmoil. The main thing bothering the universities was, is our class diverse enough?
Now, which leads me, I don't know if I told you the story. I have a friend who is on the medical admission committee for Rutgers University Medical School.
No, you didn't. Chris is
Okay.
interested. He's
Anyway,
got ailments.
he's recently telling me that he is being pushed to pass on somebody who has a 1.8 GPA entering his junior year, but who wants to go to medical school or entering his
1.8.
top or
For
his
people who are
senior,
not familiar, what is a 1.8? What is that? A D plus?
a D plus, C minus, maybe, I don't know,
D
somewhere
minus.
in that.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Anyway, he's being pressured by the university to apply to this person who's supposed to be going through 2 semesters summer school to catch up in his deficiency. Now, you know, the old joke is, what do you call the person who graduates last in your medical school class?
Doctor.
Doctor. Would you like a doctor with 1.8 GPA?
See, Chris doesn't care because he's healthy right now. He's got most of his teeth, and he's okay.
The problem is, I mean, actually, what I think is going to happen is, if this travesty is allowed to persist, this person will probably wash out either during medical school or, God forbid, in residency, when you actually have to perform the, you know,
Or worse, what if he gets through by the hair on his chinny chin chin? What if he gets through and he becomes a practicing doctor? How am I supposed to know that this is the yuts that failed livers?
By the skin of your teeth, I guess.
All right, I'll have to go see him. This is so bizarre. All right, let's move on.
And, you know, and what's even worse is no other countries are doing this.
Well,
we are practicing self-immolation.
Well, I'll tell you one thing: the Chinese are not practicing this. Let me go on here a second here. Here's an article about being healthy in New Jersey, and the main area, the headline is healthcare workforce. But what is the problem? They say, okay, one national poll found 72% of emergency physicians felt burned out. I can understand that. Putting pressure on both the state and the healthcare industry, both to recruit more workers from diverse communities. Were these people dying outside of the emergency room because the person that is the doctor is not the same color or height as they are, or were they dying because the poor doctor has been working?
As a former primary care physician, if you go by that logic, I had to have had experienced every disease that my patients had. That's kind of scary.
It is kind of scary. Oh, God almighty here. This is, once again, this idea of objectivity, which has been under attack from the, let us say, the left, from the politically correct. It matters, and yet it matters less and less and less. And objectivity is mocked. You know what they call objectivity or logic and reason in the colleges now? Eurologic, Euro reason, Euro objectivity. That is, because it was started and maintained by white men, you don't have to trust it. You don't have to give it its due here. And one of the areas where you see this is we no longer are intimidated by words. That is, we are no longer listening to what the words are saying. For example, asylum. Asylum came about because when the Jews were dying by their millions in concentration camps, the whole world did nothing. And the Jews tried to go to different places, and places like Canada said not one Jew. And even the United States, which is such a good-hearted country, turned the Jews back. They actually turned them away from here and sent them back to Europe, where, of course, they were killed. But later on, when we came to our senses and to our good heart, We saw that was wrong. So we set up asylum. Asylum is meant for people who are threatened with genocide, period. We have other programs that take care of people who have experienced a bad storm in their country or just want to come here for greater opportunity. But asylum was put in place specifically to take care of people who are being massacred, and we do. We have, for example, the Hutus and the Tutsis in Rwanda. If you've seen
Right,
that
or
show,
back in
Rwanda.
Cambodia back in the 70s.
Absolutely. They wiped out a fifth of the whole population. So we need something in place for these poor souls who are being slaughtered. And this is what we came up with, this program. But nowadays, it doesn't matter. It doesn't
Well,
matter.
George, I blame both political parties, because neither of them wants to actually put together a cohesive immigration plan. They both
Well,
want to, they would, like many other things, they would much rather stand in their talking points and blather away to death rather than do something.
that's a great phrase, blather away their time. Yes. But it's the shame of it is that one of these days, someone is going to be wiped out, because that's the way we are as human beings. The genocides keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. And if you look back in history, genocide is fairly common. So once again, people will get tired of this nonsense and they'll eliminate the whole program. And then
So I'm
where
going
will
to ask
people
you a
go?
bigger question, George. Do you think that the people are going to get tired of this rampant aggressive progressivism and vote in 2022 to overturn it?
Here's the thing, the only person who showed up to do this had some other problems, and his name is Trump. He actually showed up to get rid of a lot of nonsense. But
Now, wait. The problem with Trump is I read a fascinating article 2 or 3 days ago about Trumpism without Trump. And the problem.
Let me put off that for a little bit. I want you to comment
Sure.
more on some of the stuff that we have here. We're not the only country, and you asked about it, and by chance I have an article that deals with that very issue. In England, they're also being accused of systemic racism. At the same time, when it comes to higher education, you know who gets in the most? Black Africans, Indians, these are in order, mixed race background, Black Caribbeans, and who is at the very bottom of getting into colleges? White people. And yet, this fact has no impact on the public discussion. How can you say it's systemic racism when those groups are getting into college? And in this country, how can you say there's systemic racism when?
Well, I can tell you how. Not that I agree with it, I don't. But they claim we're now beginning to be paid back for what happened for 200 years or 250 years in America.
But that should be for Black Americans. I agree with affirmative action for Black Americans. But nowadays, you just have to be Black. And in fact, the Blacks that are doing the best are recently from Haiti or Africa. And
yes, not American Blacks.
In other words, yes, exactly. American Blacks are not doing that well. But Blacks from other places, including in my department, they told us, you have to hire, the next person you hire has to be Black, or else we're not going to let you hire anyone. They went down the list and they said, this person, they named an actual person who applied. And we said, but they don't have a PhD. Usually professors have PhDs, which shows you they're fairly well educated. And they said, okay, they went down the list further and they said, this one. And we had to hire this particular person who was a nice person, did a great job and all that, but he was from Ghana. I mean, and by the way, one of the people applying was a World War II veteran, a combat veteran, and he got pushed aside, even though he had more prestigious degree, even though we knew what he was like because he was already teaching there part-time. Nothing helped. He was also an expert, by the way, in the Middle East and had been stationed in his diplomatic career, which he also had, in Iran.
Right.
So this prize of a guy got pushed aside.
Facts don't matter.
That's right. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter at all. All right. By the way, I did come across something kind of neat. And I've noticed that people like you and I don't do well in public debates. We get shouted down and stuff. But here's an interesting question. How can you undo that? How can you do better in debates? Here's a question on a site called Quora. And the guy wrote, why is the Israeli army so abusive toward Palestinian children? That's sort of like, when did you stop beating
your wife? Right.
The answer to give is, the question presupposes facts that are untrue. Once you've said that, it stops the other party cold. And this guy goes on and says, can you show me actual evidence? There is no evidence. The Israeli army is the most moral army that has ever been seen. I think too moral. But I thought this was a good way to stop idiotic questions. Chris, you got a long life ahead of you. Remember that. The short answer to stupid questions like, when did you stop beating your wife, is, the question presupposes facts that are untrue. Memorize that. Teach it to your children, grandchildren. Okay. I thought that was kind of neat. You really see.
I saw a very interesting article in Politico about the lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania. He's a he's a 6'8" guy who looks like a biker.
Yes.
Who has a business degree from Harvard, who's been mayor of a black town outside Pittsburgh called Braddock, PA, for 5 terms, each with an increasing landslide majority after his first win, which was like by 200 votes or 100 votes. He's the lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania, and as such, head the Pennsylvania Prison Review Board. He has made it a business to try to parole rehabilitated lifers who we think deserve a second chance. And by the way, his record on that is they've done very, very well. I mean, apparently whatever screening methodology he's using is, and yet he's now running for the Senate seat for the Democratic nomination, and he's being opposed by a bunch of black people, primarily because A, he's not black, and B, it's our turn.
Let that be a lesson.
Again, I don't know what the black population is in Pennsylvania.
It's not that big,
but I don't think it's nationally it's 14%, I think.
In Philadelphia, which is still in Pennsylvania, they're a majority. But outside
elsewhere, they're not.
Well,
right.
they're large.
So, I mean, if you read this article, there's such a whiff of anti-whiteism in it.
The important point is we don't call it racism. Let me go on here. One of my reasons, and there's a couple of reasons that I am so disturbed by the trends in the population in the country as a whole, is that I think we're becoming less and less democratic all the time. And we're becoming less and less objective all the time. And we're becoming more and more racist in a certain way. And this is happening here. One area where you see this is this business of people saying there are 11 million undocumented immigrants in the country. We see a surge, it's always 11 million. We don't see a surge, it's 11 million. But meanwhile, there are 2 other estimates, one by a bank and one by 3 professors at Yale. And they both say it's probably 20 million. That makes a difference. If you have 20 million people and each one brings in a mother, father, sister, brother, what is that? That means another 20 million, which means 40 million. And if you told people we're about to get 40 million new people in, I don't know if they'd be for this program. In addition, it's not very, I don't think it's democratic if one side can bring in tens of millions of outside voters. I just don't think that's a democratic society. I think people should know about this sort of thing. But there's a lack of interest in objectivity and facts. Now, you're probably wondering, Chris, where should we worry about diversifying our workforce the most? Well, it turns out, according to a letter here in the New York Times, that we need to get cracking on diversifying figure skating. This person has written a letter and they're in a terrible state because there's not enough diversity in figure skating. And this is what we've come down to. Diversity has become the voice of God. And I don't like that, especially in medicine. I'd like everyone to know which is the butter knife and which is the scalpel. That's the bottom line for me. All right, but we're going on like this and we're not doing this. Again, logic and reason have retreated. I don't know if you would have been able to get through medical school now if
I wouldn't have been able to get into medical school. Are you kidding?
Yes, well, I would have. I'm working on a way to darken things. Anyway, here's a letter from the editor to the editor again in the New York Times. And they say, our military response to the crime of 9/11 has led us to another 20 years of war for the Afghan people. Okay. It has been heartbreaking to witness Afghanistan ripped apart by violence. She's blaming us, fueled in part by our country's reliance on the naive idea that we can bring peace through war. That's exactly how you bring peace through war. World War II was stopped not by a bunch of nattering intellectuals. It was by strong men armed, as it says in the battle. The private from the Bronx who showed up to shoot German soldiers, he ended the war.
Yeah, except for one thing, George. You know, what we're dealing with in Afghanistan is tribal rivalries, enmities, et cetera, that go back 20 generations or 50 generations.
You're absolutely right.
You cannot bring democracy to a place that does not want democracy and wouldn't know what to do with it.
I agree with you on that. I was just disturbed by the lack of historical understanding in this letter. By the way, in case you were worried, Chris, you mentioned something, you were worried about how well the undocumented workers are doing. Governor Murphy has considered giving the undocumented workers $40 million. However, liberals are not disturbed. The immigrant group calls it insulting. They said, the head of the immigrant group said it's insulting. We won't accept such a small amount. And so
maybe we ought to insult them and send them out of the state.
Listen to this. The undocumented immigrants are on a hunger strike. They're threatening not to eat free food unless they get more than a lousy $40 million.
You know, this leads to another problem. I was talking to a friend of mine. Many industries now that are opening up are finding it impossible to find workers because due to the stimulus relief plus guaranteed money coming in over the next 6 to 8 months, they're making more now than they were when they were working. So why should they go back to work? And I don't blame them.
I'm not going back to work. Anyway, that's a very good point. Here's something interesting. Virginia is moving toward total ideological criteria for requiring for teachers. I'm just going to read you one of these.
Meaning what?
Meaning college teachers or school, K through 12. Okay. Can a state punish its school teachers for not having a progressive ideology? The answer is yes. Teacher evaluations now must show, quote, a teacher must demonstrate a commitment to equity in providing instruction and classroom strategies that result in culturally inclusive and responsive learning environments and academic achievement for all students. That means that you basically have to have the right point of view on questions of inclusion. Virginia's roadmap to equity is about racial outcome. That's what they say, not me. Racial outcome. It's not about equal opportunity or achievement based on ability. You must be culturally responsive and you must prove that you are culturally responsive. And Chris, I'm worried a lot about you there. All right, I'm going to read something else to you.
Where am I moving to, George?
Not Virginia, I'll tell you that. The Jews, you always have to have something Jewish in this, right? And this is written by someone else, a guy named Eric Hoffer, a longshoreman who also did a lot of writing. The Jews are a peculiar people. Things happen to things permitted to other nations are forbidden to Jews. Other nations drive out thousands, even millions, and there is no refugee problem. Russia did it, Poland did it, Czechoslovakia did it, Turkey threw out 1 million Greeks, Algeria threw out 1 million Frenchmen, and Indonesia threw out God knows how many millions of Chinese. No one says a word about it. But in the case of Israel, the displaced Arabs have become eternal refugees. Everyone insists that Israel must take back every single Arab, including those who tried to kill them. All right. I have one other thing.
Oh, wait. There's a very simple answer for that.
What?
And it ties in what you're talking about, systemic racism. It's called systemic anti-Semitism.
Well, that's true too, but I don't like that answer. All right, I'll have to
listen. In the '73 war, if it hadn't been for Nixon, Israel would have been annihilated.
Right.
And he actually had to fight our European allies who wanted Israel to go to hell in a handbasket during '73.
In the '67 war, there's a lot of wars there for a nation that's only been around 80 years. Israel did not receive any American aid until after the 1967 war. And the reason they did is this. During the war, in the middle of the war where people are shooting and stuff like that in the 1967 war, France, which had been supplying fighter jets to Israel, decided they're not going to send any more fighter jets to Israel, and they're not going to send any more parts for the French fighter jets the Israelis already bought from them. So there was one country helping Israel by selling them military equipment at a fair price, and they stopped in the middle of it. Then the United States came in because the United States was the only country who would sell them equipment. By now, Israel makes a lot of its own equipment, and it's very good stuff. But still, it's amazing in the world. These refugees from the Holocaust finally get a few square feet of desert, and not one country will help them. And then
So what's going to happen, George, in the future if we become, quote, more progressive, and progressive equals anti-Israel, and America will not stand behind Israel at some point?
I don't know. Chris, do you have any friends? Yes, I'll just assume you do have friends.
Okay.
All right. Are any of them enthusiastic about Israel?
I've had 6 who've traveled there.
Really? Were they all Jewish?
Yes. Yeah. They all made their pilgrimage.
Chris,
See,
what
that's the
about
problem.
you? What about Chris?
Who, me?
Have you been there?
No.
All right, you'd be welcome. You'd be welcome. Anyway, thank you very much for going along with my teasing and other remarks by Larry. That's all I have to say for today. I think we've covered most of the important topics that illuminate our time or aggravate our time for the moment. Thank you very much.